I stood at the Denver winter market, holding 2 pastry boxes, guessing my parents' preference. I pressed the phone to my ear. My mother, Susan, sounded nervous. "We celebrated Christmas yesterday." The line rustled. My father, Richard, took over. His voice was blunt. "Excluding you made us feel like a real family." He hung up. The festive noise faded into absolute silence. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is right now. I would love to know who is in our community. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I didn't drop the pastries in a dramatic display of grief. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. It was the precise, cold clarity of an auditor who finally sees the glaring discrepancies in a lifelong ledger. I turned away from the twinkling lights of the Denver market and walked straight to a brick building 3 blocks down the street, the Women and Children's Transitional Sanctuary. I walked inside the warm, quiet lobby and handed the 2 boxes of expensive pastries to a tired-looking woman near the front desk. Her name tag read Maria. Beside her, a little girl with bright eyes and a missing front tooth peeked out from behind a worn winter coat. "I am guessing you are about 9 years old," I said gently. She nodded. "Jada," her mother whispered, offering a tired but genuine smile. "Enjoy the sweets," I told them, and walked back out into the freezing Colorado air. Returning to my car, I sat behind the steering wheel. The silence in the cabin was heavy, but it was no longer suffocating. For my entire life, I had been bound by the invisible chain of the survivor. It is a specific, insidious kind of psychological prison. You are trained from childhood to believe that your utility is your only value. You become the perpetual fixer, carrying the emotional and financial burdens of people who refuse to carry themselves, silently convinced that if you just sacrifice enough, they will eventually love you. You endure neglect and casual cruelty, mistaking your high tolerance for pain as a form of strength. But endurance is not a virtue when it is demanded by those who continually exploit you. It is just a chain, invisible and heavy, keeping you tied to a debt you never actually owed. I rubbed my eyes trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. I had been the silent investor in their version of family, and the returns were entirely bankrupt. I pulled my laptop from my bag, flipped it open, and connected to the coffee shop Wi-Fi across the street. My fingers flew across the keyboard with absolute precision. I opened a new email to my real estate attorney, Walter. Subject line: immediate cancellation of deed transfer. The message was brief, transactional, and sterile. Walter, cease all progress on the transfer of the mountain property to Richard and Susan. The estate remains 100% in my name. Terminate the process immediately and confirm receipt. That mountain estate was a $650,000 property I had purchased entirely with my own money. It was supposed to be my ultimate act of fixing a secure, luxurious retirement home for my parents, handed over free and clear. I had spent the last 3 months finalizing the paperwork, preparing to hand them the keys as the ultimate Christmas gift. Now, I realized my affection had been a subscription, with me footing the bill. I hit send. The email vanished into the digital ether. At 11:51 at night, I had been the discarded daughter. By 12 o'clock midnight, my orders to halt the transaction were legally documented. The deed would never be filed. There was no hesitation. Just the quiet hum of the car heater and the profound realization that my investment in this family was terminated. To understand the extreme speed and absolute coldness of my retaliation, you have to understand the business model of my family. I had always been the silent investor in their version of family. While my sister, Courtney, was the golden child who could do no wrong, I was the designated crisis manager. If there was a financial shortfall, Morgan covered it. If a family event needed planning and funding, Morgan handled the logistics. My entire existence was defined strictly by my usefulness. The $650,000 mountain estate was supposed to be the crowning achievement of my portfolio. My parents had complained for years about wanting to retire to the Colorado mountains, hinting heavily about their lack of savings and their precarious future. I worked 80-hour weeks consulting for tech firms, saving every extra penny, living in a cramped apartment so I could eventually buy them that house outright. But my exclusion from their secret Christmas celebration wasn't a random oversight. It was a calculated penalty. Exactly 2 weeks prior, we had been at a rare family dinner. My father, Richard, had a long-standing habit of making degrading jokes at my expense, mocking my career, my clothes, my single status, while my mother and sister laughed along. It was the currency they used to bond. That night, for the first time in 28 years, I calmly stated a boundary. I told him his comments were disrespectful and asked him to stop. The reaction was immediate and toxic. My father accused me of being too sensitive. My mother sighed heavily, claiming I was ruining the vibe of the evening. Courtney rolled her eyes and told me to take a joke. When I refused to apologize for demanding basic human respect, they iced me out. They didn't speak to me for 14 days. I thought it was just a temporary silent treatment, a childish tantrum. I hadn't realized they would go so far as to coordinate an entire holiday behind my back explicitly to punish me. Their actions proved a devastating truth. They only wanted my resources, not my presence. They wanted the daughter who wrote the checks and solved the problems, but they despised the woman who demanded a seat at the table as an equal. The mountain estate was the ultimate prize they felt entitled to, the final payout of my lifelong servitude. They believed they could treat me with absolute contempt and still receive the keys to a $650,000 home because I had always folded. I had always prioritized their comfort over my own dignity. They miscalculated. They assumed my silence over the past 2 weeks was me retreating in shame, preparing to grovel for their forgiveness. They didn't realize that in those 14 days of silence, the foundation of my loyalty had permanently crumbled. I had spent my life studying our family dynamic like a cold document, analyzing it the way an auditor scrutinizes a classified case file, searching for the core root of their toxicity. When my father flatly stated that excluding me made things easier, he wasn't just being cruel, he was giving me the final piece of data I needed to close the account. I was no longer a daughter trying to earn love. I was a creditor writing off a bad debt. The fallout began less than 48 hours later. Walter, my attorney, had efficiently executed my instructions. By Monday morning, a formal legal notice was delivered to my parents, informing them that the deed transfer was permanently canceled. My phone lit up with a barrage of notifications before I had even finished my morning coffee. My mother called first, her voice a shrill siren of panic and rage. "Morgan, what is the meaning of this? You are stealing our house. We already started packing our boxes." I kept my voice perfectly level, completely devoid of emotion. "You cannot steal something that already belongs to you, Susan. The property is in my name. It will remain in my name." She gasped, genuinely shocked by my clinical tone. My phone buzzed continuously against the kitchen counter. Hostile text messages flooded my screen. My father sent a long, venomous paragraph accusing me of using money to manipulate and control them. My sister, Courtney, sent a predictable follow-up. "You are destroying the family over a stupid dinner joke. Just apologize and give them the house to keep the peace. You know how Dad is. You know how Dad is." That 5-word sentence is the absolute cornerstone of the trap of normalizing cruelty. It is a toxic, psychological mechanism used by enablers to justify abuse. When a family normalizes cruelty, they do not hold the abuser accountable. Instead, they demand that the victim expand their tolerance for pain. The ecosystem relies entirely on the victim remaining silent, so the others do not have to deal with the abuser's wrath. They label the abuser's unacceptable behavior as just a personality quirk, framing the victim's reaction, not the abuse itself, as the disruption of peace. By demanding I apologize to keep the peace, Courtney was simply demanding I return to my designated role as the family punching bag so she could remain comfortable. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain my feelings or beg for their understanding. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a hostile corporate takeover, and I was holding all the equity. I looked at the dozens of incoming messages, coldly dissecting the horrific ecosystem they represented. They weren't shocked by what they had done to me. They were absolutely shocked that I had stopped playing along. They honestly believed that my financial assets were communal family property, while my emotional well-being was entirely irrelevant. The sheer entitlement was breathtaking. My father's accusation that I was using money to control them was pure projection. They had used my desperate need for love to extract my wealth for decades. I typed a single response and sent it to a newly created group chat containing Richard, Susan, and Courtney. The message was sterile and definitive. Any further communication regarding my assets must be directed to my legal counsel. Do not contact me again. I put my phone on silent, poured my coffee down the sink, and prepared to treat my toxic family exactly like the corporate liability they truly were. I cut off the emotional supply entirely. There would be no tearful confrontations, no screaming matches, no desperate pleas for them to see my perspective. I treated my biological relatives strictly as a hostile corporate liability, completely detaching myself from any lingering sentimentality. Later that week, my attorney Walter sent over the final confirmation. The mountain estate was ironclad, registered 100% in my name, with all previous transfer documents legally voided. I instructed him to send a certified, sterile email to my parents, officially ordering them to cease all moving plans and demanding they return any spare keys they possessed. Panic set in fast. The realization that I was not bluffing breached their walls of entitlement. On Thursday evening, my apartment buzzer rang incessantly. It was Courtney. She had bypassed the doorman and was pounding on my front door. I opened it just enough to block her entry. She looked frantic, her usual smug composure completely shattered by the reality of the situation. "Morgan, please," she begged, her voice trembling with genuine fear. "You have to reverse this decision right now. You don't understand what is going on. Dad is going to lose his mind." I leaned against the doorframe, my expression completely unreadable. "That sounds like a personal problem, Courtney. No, you need to listen to me," she practically screamed. "He already hired contractors for the mountain house. He told them you were paying for everything." I narrowed my eyes, assessing the new data. "He hired contractors for a house he does not legally own?" Courtney swallowed hard, looking terrified. "It is worse. He wanted to surprise Mom with a luxury kitchen before they moved in. He hired a private firm to gut the existing kitchen and install custom cabinets and imported marble. The invoice is massive, Morgan. It is $80,000. I felt a cold stillness wash over me. "And how exactly does he plan to pay an $80,000 invoice?" Courtney looked down at the hallway floor. "He drained his meager savings to pay the $8,000 deposit just to get them to start demolition. But for the remaining $72,000, he told the contractors you were the sole financier for the project. He filled out the authorization forms and the payment guarantees. He forged your signature, Morgan. He directed the entire massive final invoice straight to your business accounts." The silence in the hallway was absolute. My father had not just been cruel, he had crossed the line into criminal fraud. He felt so entitled to my wealth that he believed he could forge my name on binding legal documents without facing a single consequence. It was a lethal discovery, a staggering secret that instantly removed any lingering shadow of guilt I might have harbored. There was no villain redemption possible here. Courtney looked up at me, pure desperation in her eyes. "Please, Morgan, just pay it and give them the house. If the contractors find out, if the police find out, Dad could go to prison." "You cannot do that to our father." I stared at her, marveling at her absolute delusion. "He committed felony fraud, Courtney. I am not doing anything to him. He did this to himself." I closed the door directly in her face, locking the deadbolt with a satisfying, definitive click. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. The very next morning, Richard demanded an emergency meeting at the mountain estate. His voicemails were a volatile mix of authoritative commands and thinly veiled panic, demanding I meet him there immediately to sort out this minor paperwork misunderstanding. He fully expected to bully me into submission. He expected the dutiful, desperate daughter to cave under the sheer weight of his intimidation, to blindly pay the contractors and hand over the property just to avoid his wrath. I drove up the winding mountain roads to the estate, the Colorado winter landscape stark and freezing around me. When I pulled into the expansive driveway, Richard was already there, pacing aggressively inside the house. I walked through the front door and found him standing in what used to be a beautiful rustic kitchen, now completely gutted to the studs by his unauthorized contractors. Dust and debris covered the hardwood floors, mirroring the ruin of our family dynamic. "Morgan," he barked, his face red with barely contained fury. "This childish tantrum ends today." You are going to call Walter, reverse the deed cancellation, and authorize the payment for these contractors before they put a lien on the property." I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I remained ice cold, a stark contrast to his boiling rage. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a crisp manila folder. I stepped forward and handed it directly to him. He snatched it from my hands, ripping it open. Inside were 2 documents. The first was the finalized, notarized cancellation of the deed transfer, cementing my absolute ownership of the property. The second was a copy of the $80,000 total contractor invoice, showing his initial deposit and the massive remaining balance. I had used a bright yellow marker to highlight his forged rendition of my signature at the bottom of the payment guarantee. His eyes darted over the highlighted ink, and the color rapidly drained from his face. The blustering tyrant vanished entirely, replaced by a man suddenly realizing he was standing over a trap door. "I contacted the contracting firm this morning," I informed him, my voice echoing in the hollow, gutted room. "I provided them with undeniable proof that I never authorized this work. I also informed them that the signature on their contract is a forgery. They were incredibly understanding, especially after I provided them with your home address and your contact information so their legal team can pursue you directly for the remaining balance." "You didn't," he whispered, genuine terror creeping into his voice. "Morgan, that is $80,000. I do not have that kind of cash. They will completely ruin me." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. "I have also forwarded this document to the local authorities to report the forgery. The fraud division is very interested in speaking with you." He took a frantic step toward me, his hands shaking. "You are my daughter. You cannot send your own father to jail. You have the money. Just pay it." "I am the invisible daughter, remember?" I said smoothly. And excluding me just made everything easier. "The house is legally mine. The $80,000 debt is legally yours." I turned on my heel and walked out the front door. As I stepped onto the porch, I pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me, leaving him standing alone in the freezing, gutted ruins of his own making. 1 year later, the Colorado snow was falling just as heavily, but the entire landscape of my life was unrecognizable. Richard and Susan's world had collapsed completely under the weight of their own arrogance. The massive $80,000 debt, combined with the crushing legal fees from the subsequent fraud investigation, had utterly bankrupted them. Their carefully curated social standing was in ruins, their friends having quickly distanced themselves once the criminal charges became public knowledge. Courtney had stopped speaking to them entirely when they aggressively tried to pressure her into taking out personal loans to bail them out. They had nothing left to extract, and so their toxic ecosystem had starved. I, on the other hand, had found a vastly different use for the mountain property. I had officially leased the estate for exactly $1 a year to the Women and Children's Transitional Sanctuary, the exact same organization where I had dropped off those pastries a lifetime ago. They utilized the massive house as a private, secure vacation retreat for graduated families to experience a peaceful getaway. On Christmas Day, I drove up the familiar mountain road. I wasn't carrying the burden of earning love anymore. When I walked through the front doors of the estate, the warm smell of roasted turkey and pine needles filled the air. Laughter echoed brightly from the great room. Maria, the woman from the front desk, hurried over to hug me tightly. Behind her, little Jada, now 10 years old, ran up to show me a colorful drawing she had made. As we walked into the dining room, a long, beautiful table was surrounded by women and children, their faces bright with genuine joy. And there, right near the head of the table, was a beautifully decorated chair. "We saved you a seat, Morgan," Maria smiled softly. "We set a place just for you." I sat down, feeling a profound, quiet warmth spread through my chest. For so long, I had believed that walking away from blood relatives was the ultimate failure. But letting go of toxic bloodlines is actually the moment you finally find yourself. Society conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable contract, obligating us to endure abuse in the name of loyalty. But DNA is not a mandate for suffering. Choosing to sever ties with people who only value you for what they can extract is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. In the empty space they leave behind, you finally have the room to build a chosen family people who offer a seat at their table simply because they genuinely value your presence, not your utility. I've come to realize that holding on to toxic people is like drinking poison and expecting them to suffer. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person, and it doesn't mean reconciliation. Sometimes it is the only way to set yourself free and walk into your own light. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who might need the courage to set their own boundaries. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.